Herzlich willkommen, liebe Zuhörer bei Infoschall Radio. Welcome to the listeners to Infoschall Radio. And heute haben wir wieder einen besonderen Gast, Catherine Austin Fitz. Und ich denke, Lars stellt sie einfach mal ganz kurz vor, damit ihr euch ein Bild davon machen könnt.
Machen wir. So. Well, Catherine, you are in San Francisco. Hello.
Yes, hello.
How are you?
Fine. Good.
Excellent.
Always good to talk with you.
Thank you very much. It's always good to talk with you. Well, Catherine Austin Fitz was born in Philadelphia. She studied at the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School. And she also studied at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. And then she served as a managing director and member of the board of the Wall Street investment bank Dillon Read & Co., which is now part of UBS. And later she was Assistant Secretary of Housing and Federal Housing Commissioner at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And this was during the presidency of George Herbert Walker Bush. And later on, she founded the Hamilton Securities Group, which was an investment bank and a software developer. And now she is the president of Solari Incorporated and the publisher of the Solari Report, www.solari.com. And I believe she is still writing the Real Deal column for Scoop Media in New Zealand. Is this correct?
Yes.
Okay. And she was on the board of directors of the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, and she lives in the wonderful volunteer state of Tennessee in the US of A. Okay, Catherine, in order to let yourself a little bit, to introduce you a little bit to our listeners, you were once invited to become a fellow of the Council on Foreign Relations and also a member of the board of directors of the Federal Reserve System. And you said to both things, well, thanks, but no thanks. Why so?
And let me just also mention, day to day, in addition to publishing the Solari Report, I'm an investment advisor.
Yeah.
So I have a investment advisory company, Solari Investment Advisory, and so day to day I'm looking to help and understand how people can navigate their assets through this environment. So that's kind of my point of view. But when I left the Bush administration, Lars, in 1991, I made a decision. I looked at I was expecting to go back into the administration, and when that was delayed, I was looking at the changes in the environment, and I'd been an investment banker on Wall Street, and what I discovered was with new technology, there was an incredible opportunity. It was just when relational database technology had come out. There was a real opportunity to start your own firm and do something much more entrepreneurial because the technology would allow us, if you looked at a transaction that I did on Wall Street that would take 25 people to do, now with the software I could do it with 2 to 4 people. And so it dramatically changed the economics of starting your own business and doing it successfully. So I decided to start a company and was very excited about what the possibilities were to decentralize the capital raising and investment business with the new technology. And so I had made commitments and encouraged other people to leave their employment and come work for me. So I had a company up and running and with the team working and was very excited about it. And that's when the administration approached me about becoming a governor of the Federal Reserve Bank. It was the Secretary of Treasury and the White House Chief of Staff. And I just felt at that time, one, I'd made a commitment to do this business and to, the Fed is a full-time job, so I would have had to shut it down and leave. But the other thing is I also believed that there was a real challenge before us about how we were going to re-engineer the American economy to stay competitive in the process of globalization. And I was interested in working on real solutions, and I didn't think I could do that from the Fed, but I did think I could do that as an entrepreneur with much more flexibility to kind of prototype things that you could never prototype if you were at the Fed. So I saw the Fed as sort of a staff job as opposed to a line job. And of course, I was very interested in using the technology to build not just equity for everybody else, but for myself and my team. So, whether it was because I wanted to be an equity owner or because I'd made commitments to other people or because I just didn't see the Fed job as being, I kind of saw the Fed as leading the movement of capital out of the country, and I wanted to work on how we created new equity. And one possibility, of course, was to go out to Silicon Valley, where I'm talking to you from now. But I was concerned that Silicon Valley was going to end up using this technology to kind of centralize, and I was very interested in seeing where the decentralization opportunities were. So it's a long answer, but so I decided not to do the Fed. When I declined doing the Fed, the White House Chief of Staff, John Sununu, asked me if I would be on the board of Sallie Mae, which was not a full-time position, so I could do it while I was running Hamilton. And it was very gracious of him. And so I went on the board of Sallie Mae, and while I was there, about a year or two later, so it was about 1993, the chairman, who was just a wonderful man, is the head of an S&L from Kentucky, pulled me aside, and he whipped out a big sort of glossy brochure for the Council on Foreign Relations, and he said, the time has come where you need to join. And so it's always the royal we want you to ask Nick Brady, who'd been the Secretary of the Treasury, and he was the former chairman of my firm, Dillon Reed, said, we want you to ask Nick to sponsor you for the council. Well, because I turned down the Fed, the last thing I wanted to do was ask Nick Brady for anything.
Yeah.
And I kind of felt, I think you hit these points where there's a divide in the road, and I really just didn't want to be part of centralizing things. I really wanted to be part of figuring out real solutions. And if you look at the kind of transactions and investments I was prototyping, it was two different worlds, and so I just felt uncomfortable. Now, I could have seen if there was any. I mean, there were plenty of other people who could sponsor me other than Nick, but I just didn't want to. I didn't want to stir the pot where there might be bad feelings from my turning down the Fed, and so I said to him, I really don't think this is a good idea. And he looked at me and he said, and really, terror in his eyes, he said, you don't understand. If you don't do this, you'll be out forever. Kind of like I'd become a non-person. It was funny, and he was seriously concerned about me. Yeah. And anyway, so the feeling was you really had to. Now, I've had a lot of interaction with people from the Council on Foreign Relations, and over time, and I would say that it's a large group of people. Last time I looked, it was about 3,000 to 4,000 people. And a lot of the people are just interacting with it like it's a think tank and it's sort of a social network. So I think the council is very different than what people think it is. Although they're pots, the executive committee is a different fish anyway. But so that's the story of how I was so stupid as to not end up as a member of the Council on Foreign Relations.
Okay. Well, if people want to learn more about you and your biography, I think they should read Dillon Reed and Co. Incorporated and the Aristocracy of Stock Profits, which is available at solari.com. And in that text, which is a superb text, you mentioned the central banking warfare investment model. Could you tell us about this thing?
Yes, and I have to credit James Turk with this insight. I was sitting in a wonderful investment conference in London and heard James gave a presentation and used this term. So I'm pilfering it from Turk. Essentially, the central banking warfare model is the investment model which really the planet Earth has been managed on for the last 500 years, or needless to say, centuries. But essentially, central banks print money, and then the military makes sure that people take it, and the currency system stays liquid while extracting natural resources for cheap. So it's kind of a way you can print your own paper and trade paper for real things, and make sure everybody, continues to play ball. And there are really two sides to the coin. One is the central bank and the management of the monetary policy, but the other, and one very much not appreciated in the financial community, is the military. And when I say military, I include military and intelligence, both on the overt side and the covert side, because a lot of what makes the system go is what happens on the covert side. So what you're watching globally, and what we're watching with the dollar, is sort of the peak of the central banking warfare model, where we're literally seeing a global empire able to implement taxation globally through the balance sheet. So numerous countries and central banks buy dollar or dollar-denominated assets, and then they go down in value every year. And that's a tax through the balance sheet that's quite invisible to the population, including the people who live within the dollar area. So if you look at the debasement of the currency here in America, it's been extraordinary in terms of extracting a kind of tax from the savings, because as we know, this kind of inflation and debasement is very damaging to savers. And so what we're watching is tremendous tension globally with how painful and expensive the central banking warfare model has become. And what we're also seeing with the internet and new technology is many, many more people having an understanding and being able to see how it works. The technology allows us to integrate and communicate globally and across different expertise. So the central banking warfare model is certainly coming to a point where, as it continues to centralize, it really it's extracting more and more subsidy and damaging more and more productivity, and the desire of a variety of parties to decentralize, which I assume is part of this latest round of politics at the IMF, is creating tremendous tension. So how the model is going to get reinvented or how it's going to shift is really coming to a head. So it's a very appropriate time to talk about not only the model and the model we've been in, but what model we need to go to.
Yeah, I think we will do this at the end. But since you mentioned central banks, military, and currency, can you tell us about your thoughts on the war in Libya and in regard to Mr. Gaddafi's desire to have a gold dinar, a currency that is backed by gold, and to abandon the US dollar and the euro?
I think what you're watching in Libya is a perfect example of the tension between those who would like to decentralize to their advantage and those who want central control. So part of the tension is centralization versus decentralization, and the other part of the tension is the politics between Russia, China, and the United States. If you look at the way the central banking warfare model runs the currency, what you'll see is to control the currency, you really need to control the trading in an essential asset. So there's a remarkable connection, synergy between the control of the oil trade and the maintenance of the dollar as the reserve currency. So to the extent that people, to the extent that the Anglo-American alliance controls the trade in oil, that very much helps to assert and maintain the dollar as the reserve currency. I've always said my new advisory company's name is Sea Lane Advisory, and it's partly because I've always said he who controls the sea lanes controls the world, because if you control the sea lanes, you can control the trade in oil and other essentials, and that has a lot to do with how you manage the reserve currency and whose currency is the reserve currency. So back to Libya, I think one thing is Libya is a source of important source of oil, and it's particularly sweet light oil,
Yeah.
and that's part of the Russia versus China versus the sort of the Anglo-American alliance. Who's going to get that oil, and how does that relate to politics of politics in the Middle East, which are quite complex at this point. So that's number one. But also we know that Gaddafi had big reserves, which the U.S. has seized, I think about 30 billion, and he's got quite a pot of gold and has been indicating a desire, one, to see a gold dinar, but also to see more sort of equity investment in Africa, sort of the African development model, which is more decentralized. And so whether it's the oil, whether it's the currency issue, whether it's the independent sort of equity investment circulating in Africa without going through the financial capitals, Gaddafi in many forms has been pushing the, sort of the decentralization. And this was particularly painful if you look at the European crisis, because to the extent Libya is a very important source of oil and resources to Europe. So if he swings to a different, if he swings his supply lines in different ways, it could be very painful, whether in the U.S. or to Europe. So, clearly what we're seeing is whether those resources are going to benefit what I call the pro-centralization team, or whether they're going to benefit the pro-decentralization team in that area of the world. And I think conceptually that's basically what this is about.
Okay, in connection to the central banks, let's please switch to the International Monetary Funds. What is your opinion about the IMF and its wish of a one world currency? There is a concept paper from the IMF about this. You know it?
I've read some of the speeches, or some of the recent speeches, and that's what I know. I don't understand the details of what they're proposing, other than the general concept.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible?
Do you
do you think it's possible to finish this plan, and what must happen to finish this plan?
Do we have to, for example, to destroy the dollar and the euro?
Not necessarily. I mean, you could evolve to a global currency without overnight destroying the dollar and the euro. I mean, what we're seeing happen globally is more and more, particularly of the G20 nations, creating ways of trading back and forth with each other and going around the dollar and even going around the euro. And if you look at the dollar's percentage market share of transactions, it's fallen dramatically in the last 5 years, and that's because there's a struggle between people who need currency to transact in the real economy. So a nation like Brazil that's growing dramatically, in its real things, versus the nations which are very dependent on this system for both taxation, economic warfare, and have very high components of speculation. So, such as the U.S. So there's a real tension between those who are just trying to get something positive done in the real economy and those who are using the monetary system to control. And so that's part of the tension, and how if you go to a global currency too quickly, you don't find a way for those issues to get sort of sorted out and settled out in a positive way. That's number one. But number two, I think you can have a lot, and that's what I presume what the IMF has been trying to do with the SDR system. I think you can have a lot of sort of global currency at the meta level between central banks to settle balances, which presumably they've probably been doing with gold anyway. The problem gets to when you get to a global currency that is both at the institutional level and the retail level, then the question becomes, well, if you're going to do that through a global central bank, who's going to control the military? And this is particularly a sensitive subject because if you look at all the steps that we've been taking here in the United States to make sure everybody can transact with a digital currency, you're talking about something that is more centralized power if you combine a global central currency with a global enforcement capability than has ever existed on the planet. It's quite dangerous, and it's quite dangerous to go there quickly. So you can't get to a global currency without talking about global enforcement, and that is a very tense subject, particularly for the people who are managing the dollar system, because the dollar system has become, as the market share has shifted, increasingly fragile, and so I suspect just every time you start to see the dollar take a nosedive and really get too far down, suddenly we get wars and events and all sorts of covert activity going on, and then the dollar comes back up. And if you look at the various squabbles that go on, or the squabbles you can guess are going on at that point, it will show you what a fragile system it is.
Okay. Catherine, if you want, I'll send you the concept paper from the IMF, where it's published that they're seeking for a one world currency. It's original from the IMF and from the website. I sent you the link if you want. And
Oh, good, yes.
let's take another look to Europe. There is a great problem at Greece, Ireland, and all the Euro crisis. The IMF will also read measures for Greece, and the problems of Greece are rising up. It's normally, I think so. What do you think? Is this a raid by the friends of the IMF, and they will get all the assets from Greece and was heißt die Hülle wegwerfen?
Die Hülle?
Ja, so die leere Hülle.
I don't know, but maybe you ask, are those austerity measures, for example, and all those proposals, are they, in your point of view, heading in the right direction, or are we chasing the rabbit into the hole? And what would you propose otherwise?
Well, that's an excellent question. I see what has happened to Ireland or Greece, or Iceland's another good example, as the fraudulent inducement of a nation. So, and I'm going to grossly oversimplify. You go into a country, you bubble its economy by the help of a few banks. As you do, you extract huge amounts of subsidy and change who owns the equity. And then when you're ready, you dump it and try and stick the cost to the wider population, and then basically use that as an excuse to dramatically reduce the standard of living, including raiding the pension funds and abrogating a whole variety of social contracts with the general population. So it's a way basically. Ultimately, it's a much more sophisticated game, but ultimately it's no different than bank robbery. So you basically strip a place of its capital and its assets, and then you turn around and blame the place for, quote unquote, bad behavior. So it's a mean game, it's an evil game, and it's a game which basically, in some places is a depopulation game. So if you look at what we did to Russia in the 90s, you literally engineered significant amount of sort of demodernization and depopulation through economic means. But when it was all said and done, a small group of parties had a much better control of the oil industry and the oil assets in that place than going into it. So now what you do is you what you're engineering is a much more centralized control, number one, and number two, ownership of assets by large corporations as opposed to sovereign governments. So think of it this way, as literally a way of re-engineering resources on planet from sovereign government to control to corporate and private investment control. We're changing the model. So the central banking warfare model has been run by central banks and governments. Now it's going to be run at a much more private investment and level. And sort of part of the solution to the environmental problem of having too many people is to dramatically reduce the standard of living. And this comes at a time when, for 50 years, the sovereign governments of both Europe and America have promised enormous retirement benefits to the baby boomer population, the post-World War II babies. And as that population now gets ready to retire, basically what we've done, grossly oversimplified, is to suck out all the capital behind their retirement benefits, move it elsewhere, and then now we've got an end game of leaving them high and dry. And that's what you're watching. And the IMF has been absolutely instrumental to this process. There's great investigative journalism by Greg Palast and Naomi Klein about their role, both of the IMF and the World Bank in Latin America, which I would point you to. But if there was anything I could point you to that really tells the story, I think the most brilliant video I've ever seen, and really the most prescient leader I've ever seen, was Sir James Goldsmith. If you go to my blog at solari.com, you'll see an interview that Sir James Goldsmith gave Charlie Rose. In 1994, Goldsmith really made an effort. He wrote a book called The Trap and made a tremendous effort to stop the adoption of the Uruguay round of GATT and the creation of the World Trade Organization. And he warns of the remarkable centralization of the economy that's going to happen globally as a result of these plans, and talks about how devastating it's going to be, including, intimating significant depopulation, and the sort of insanity of a model that makes, by subsidizing massively private corporations, will make profit for corporations, but dramatically reduce both the human equity, the environmental equity, and the financial equity on planet Earth. So it shrinks total wealth while it centralizes it into a few hands. And we tend to think of this model as being one that makes money. It doesn't. It consolidates wealth in a way that you can see on the stock exchanges, but it's been dramatically destructive of wealth and total wealth, and in that lies our opportunity of where the model can go, because the model has been so destructive of, centralization is so destructive of wealth, that I think that's part of what we're grappling with. But anyway, so whether it's re-engineering from a sovereign government model into a centralization model, or dramatically shifting wealth up into, as George H.W. Bush said, tighter and righter hands, or in, sort of promoting the economic warfare between the parties who want to be in control of the centralized model. We're watching quite a big change, and what's needed is exactly the one you're leading, Lars, which is, okay, well, what is the model? How do we change it? Now, you asked finally what I would do. The first thing I would do is I would promote transparency, because what you'll find in any research or work on economies that lead to a more decentralized and wealth-creating model on a peaceful basis, as opposed to a warlike basis, which is anarchy and chaos. What they all say is the key to optimization of equity and economic values is transparency. And to give you an example, I'd point you to a wonderful book, very old now, by an economist named Robert Axelrod called The Evolution of Cooperation, and we can talk more about that. But I think step one in any model, and many models need to be discussed and prototyped, is transparency. And so there needs to be a much broader discussion of what is happening and what we can do about it, and many more linkages built, because whatever we do, it's going to have to be something much more global than the current model. So step one, I would start with transparency and alternative arrangements, which is exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing the G20 nations at the national level, but we're seeing many individuals, whether it's barter or local currencies, saying, something, we need to get away from the decentralization people and their currency. We need to make another plan.
Yeah.
Catherine, one
Yeah?
private question. Aren't you get angry by the knowledge about this crime of governments and banks?
How do you give them the knowledge?
No, are you angry at those crimes in government and in the financial system, the banking system?
No, I'm not.
Not? Okay.
And the reason is, how can I describe this? In I was the have you guys seen the movie Enemy of the State?
Yes.
Yes.
And
okay, so I played Will Smith in real life.
yes.
So I was the target of a covert operation. I was the target of basically government engineered economic warfare. And I lived through quite an extraordinary.
Related to your
they destroyed
securities.
Right. They whatever we were watching the head of the IMF go through now, it's not unlike what I dealt with for 11 years. Except they were never accused me of anything. Although they did try and frame me repeatedly, and I was able to beat the frames, which was quite miraculous. But the long and short of it was, at one point I realized, because I was the target of 18 audits and investigations, 12 pieces of litigation, and serious smear campaign and physical harassment and surveillance. And at one point it was so immersive, I sat down and I did a study. I said, if this keeps up, I could die. And so I did a study of who had lived through such a circumstance and who made it and who didn't. And what I discovered was the people who didn't make it got angry, and the thing that killed them was their own anger. And so I discovered that anger was a very, very dangerous emotion to the person who felt it. And that was number one. So now the other thing is, I'm a very devout Christian, and and sort of my spiritual study leads me to believe, to look at things very, very differently. So I tend to look at things spiritually, and I also tend to see a lot of what's going on in planet Earth at the root to be spiritual warfare.
Yeah.
And in spiritual warfare, it's the job of the individual. So it's my responsibility to me, evil is a spirit, and it's my job to separate evil from the people it's coming through and to bring them to the light. And you can't do that if you're angry at them. So that's another reason.
And you don't really
Pardon me?
fight. And you don't really fight the evil in this world, because it's a fact.
I'm don't a Christian,
Right,
but I love your answer.
well, let me mention a couple of other things. The other thing is, I find that the corruption, while it is more noticeable at the higher levels of leadership, I've functioned at the higher levels of leadership, or at a lower level, but to watch the higher levels, certainly here in the United States and through other leadership positions globally. And what I find is the corruption is not at the top; it's everywhere. It's not. I find a lot of the a lot of the journalism that tries to blame things on the leadership is not looking deeply enough to understand that a lot of what the leadership is doing is going out and stealing the resources they need to satisfy a greedy population who doesn't want to look at their own culpability and responsibility in this. And I think much of the more sort of evil behavior from the leadership is because they've been trained to believe that they cannot expect any kind of enlightened approach from their general population. And so I have enormous empathy for the double binds that the leadership finds themselves in. And I've seen many a good person at the top had their hands tied by the competition with people who are not so enlightened, as well as the absence of enlightenment for the crowd. So I think that the actual story of what's going on and how you get to solutions, I think things are more complex and murky. And I'd just like to, if I could go run on for just a little bit more, Lars, I'd like to tell my red button story, which I know I've told you, but I think we can't hear it enough.
Yeah.
And that is, I was giving a speech. It's so funny, never have an epiphany when you're giving a speech. I was giving a speech in the summer of 2000 to a wonderful group of people called Spiritual Frontiers Foundation. And they have a conference once a year to talk about how they can help our society evolve spiritually. And they're very spiritually committed. And I was in the middle of the speech talking about how the U.S. economy is the global leader of money laundering. We launder at the time, $500 billion to $1 trillion a year. And I asked them what would happen if we stopped, and we talked about how, the government deficit would have trouble financing and how the New York Stock Exchange might crash because that money would come over to you guys in Munich and London and Singapore and Hong Kong. So I said to them, well, let's pretend there's a big red button up here on the lectern, and if you push that button, you can stop all hard narcotics trafficking and dirty money and organized crime in your community tomorrow. Who here will push the button? And out of 100 people, only one would push the button. And the reason was, I asked them, was they said, we don't want our mutual funds to go down. We don't want our retirement savings to lose value. We don't want our government checks to stop. We don't want our taxes to go up. And so I said, you mean you want, basically the CIA and the powers that be to continue to bring drugs, and market drugs to your neighbor's children so that your stock market values will stay up? And they said, yes, that's right.
So is this what we call codependency in addiction?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is why transparency is so important, because the conversation we need to have is not how do we push the red button, but how do we turn the red button green? How do we make money pushing the red button? Because we need to find an economically sustainable way to move from our dependency on extracting resources from others wrongfully and or in unproductive ways. And we need to get to a net energy plus model instead of an extractive model.
Yeah. We're running out of time.
Yes.
Unfortunately. Can we do another conversation with you soon?
Oh, I would love to, Lars.
We love to. Okay, Jens. Then we save our questions for the next time.
Yeah, only
Okay.
a last one. It's a really short one, I hope so. What is your prediction, Cathrin? Will the global crisis increase, and what's your proposal for solutions?
The solution she had already.
Yeah,
but maybe.
Well, no, we can talk more about solutions, but Lawrence Wilkerson was just on the Solier report. He was Colin Powell's chief of staff. Just amazing history in the military, and he was describing a scenario designs by Royal Dutch Shell. One was called Scramble, where everybody just scrambles for more resources, and the other was called Blueprint, where we come together and figure out how we can share and optimize this resource and get along together. And that's exactly your question, which is how do we we're headed into scramble and it's getting progressively uglier. How do we find a way to migrate to blueprint? And that's the challenge before us. And so I think our next conversation, Lars, should be scramble versus blueprint. How do we get to blueprint?
Yes, we will do this. And we want to, because you have such a great expertise in the real world, the real economy, the real financial world, and you are not afraid to talk about it. And we need more people like you.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we need more people like you leading the global conversation, so thank you for the opportunity.
We thank you, and we will call you again. And
Is
now
there
off the
anything,
record.
one moment, is there anything what you wish to tell our listeners?
I look forward to talking to you again.
Okay, then
All right.
we'll take this opportunity. Cathrin, can you send us? Can you send me maybe an email with a photograph of you for press purposes?
Okay.
Would this be okay? And another
Yes.
thing, I will soon conduct an interview with Peter Dale Scott. You know him.
Oh, fabulous.
Yes, and my topic, our topic will be oil and drugs.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I will ask you again if you have some questions, okay?
Okay, his new book, The War Machine, is marvelous. I put a review of it up on the blog.
Okay. I have ordered it. I haven't read it yet, but I will read it before.
It's absolutely fantastic. I just had dinner with him.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Then I can ask him if we could do together a conversation, a stereo conversation.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, great. I will ask him about this. And this is no lie. I have sent him our interview.
Oh, good.
Interview you gave me. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book, and he's a marvelous man.
Yes, he's one of those very few people I consider as a genius.
Yeah, he is a genius.
Yes. Okay,
he's got a fine heart. Okay, bye.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks a lot, and bye.
Bye.